Ever feel like maybe the universe is like dropping hints or something, you know? Like you should be manifesting a yacht.
A yacht.
Okay. Maybe not a yacht, but at least like a couple extra zeros in your bank account.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So that's what we're diving into today. Prosperity theology.
Oh, right.
You sent in this Wikipedia article, and
Mm.
it's basically like a whole crash course in believing your way to wealth.
Well, it is a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
But yeah, the connection between faith and finances is definitely at the core of it, yeah.
And it's huge, right? Like we're not just talking about like dropping an extra 20 in the collection plate here. This is like tied into some major movements within Christianity.
Absolutely. What's fascinating is how it blends like older ideas,
Yeah.
you know? The American dream, that whole anyone can achieve success thing, but with this spiritual twist.
Mm.
So it's not just about hard work, it's about God rewarding that work, specifically with material wealth.
Okay. So success equals piety.
In the eyes of prosperity theology, you could say that, yeah.
Okay. But this Wikipedia article uses a bunch of different terms like prosperity theology, prosperity gospel, health and wealth gospel. Is there even a difference?
Think of it like a spectrum.
Okay.
On one end, you've got this general belief that God wants good things for you, including financial security. I mean, most Christians wouldn't even question that.
Right.
But as you move along that spectrum, you get into these more specific interpretations of the Bible and these bolder claims about wealth being a direct result of your faith and, crucially, your donations. That's where these terms like word of faith and seed faith come into play.
So multiple names reflecting different levels of, we'll say, intensity.
Exactly.
Okay.
But before we get into the weeds, let's start with the foundation. What does prosperity theology actually teach?
Okay.
At its core, it claims that financial blessing and physical well-being are, like, always God's will for believers.
Mm-hmm.
Not just a possibility, but a guaranteed outcome if you're doing things right.
Guaranteed.
That's the claim.
So anyone facing hardship financially or health-wise, are they like doing something wrong in the eyes of prosperity theology?
That's a major point of contention, yeah.
Yeah.
Critics would argue that this line of thinking can be incredibly damaging because it places blame on individuals for circumstances that are often completely beyond their control.
And justifying the wealth of those who have it while kind of spiritually side-eyeing those who don't.
Exactly. But those who subscribe to prosperity theology often point to specific interpretations of the Bible to back up their claims.
Okay, so how do they get there? How do they justify this link between faith and a fat wallet?
Well, they often interpret certain scriptures like Malachi 3:10, which talks about God opening the windows of heaven and pouring out blessings. Quite literally, they see it as like a contract you give to God, and
Yeah.
he's obligated to give back, but like with interest.
So it's a divine investment strategy.
Basically, yeah.
You're investing in God, and he's contractually obligated to make you rich.
In a nutshell, yeah. And that's a big part of it, the giving aspect. They call it tithing. And it's not just about tossing a few bucks in a basket either. A lot of prosperity preachers emphasize lavish lifestyles as like proof of God's favor. Think mega mansions, private jets, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so the bigger the house, the bigger the faith.
Right.
That feels a little off, doesn't it? Like reducing faith in God's love to material possessions.
That's a common criticism. A lot of people, both within and outside of Christianity, see it as promoting greed and materialism, which, you know, doesn't exactly scream, love thy neighbor, does it?
It's definitely giving what would Jesus buy wholesale. But this idea of faith equaling wealth, it didn't just appear out of thin air, did it? Where did this prosperity theology thing even come from?
You're right. It has a surprisingly long history, and it's actually intertwined with other movements and philosophies that might surprise you.
Like what? Give me the historical rundown.
Let's rewind to the late 19th century. Remember the gospel of wealth, championed by figures like Andrew Carnegie?
Vaguely. It was all about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right?
Exactly. Success was seen as a direct result of hard work, kind of implying that those who remained poor were somehow morally lacking. Now, while that wasn't explicitly religious, you can see how those ideas about wealth and worthiness start to, intertwine a little bit.
Okay, so there's a connection there. But how do we get from Andrew Carnegie to, like, televangelists promising miracles?
That's where the New Thought movement comes in.
Okay.
They were big around the same time, late 19th, early 20th century,
Yeah.
and they were all about the power of the mind to manifest things, health, wealth, the whole shebang.
Oh, right. The law of attraction.
Exactly. And while they weren't using explicitly Christian language, That focus on positive thinking, on speaking things into existence, that's a key element of prosperity theology.
So it's like a melting pot of ideas, some religious, some not, that eventually come together to form this like prosperity-focused belief system. But who made that connection?
That's where E.W. Kenyon comes in. He was a Pentecostal minister in the early 20th century, and he basically took those New Thought, mind power ideas and blended them with his evangelical Christian beliefs.
A Pentecostal minister. For those of us who might not be fluent in all the denominations, can you give us a quick breakdown of what that means?
Of course. Pentecostalism is a branch of Protestant Christianity that emerged in the early 1900s. They're known for their emphasis on spiritual experience, things like speaking in tongues, divine healing, and, you guessed it, the power of faith to affect change in the physical world. So Kenyon's background kind of primed him to connect these ideas.
Okay, so the stage is set. What did Kenyon preach specifically that made him such a pivotal figure in all of this?
Well, Kenyon, he taught about this thing called overcoming faith.
Overcoming faith.
Yeah, it emphasized the power of like our words to shape reality.
Okay.
But instead of just like putting it out there to the universe, you're calling on God to make it happen.
Right.
He believed that through Christ, believers were entitled to divine health and deep prosperity, accessible through faith and positive declarations.
So instead of asking God for something, you're declaring it as yours, almost like you already have it because of your faith.
Exactly. And this was a big shift for a lot of Christians at the time.
Right.
And it's from these ideas that prosperity theology, as we know it today, really starts to take shape.
So Kenyon lays the groundwork, but when does this idea really start to gain some serious traction?
Things really take off after World War II, during the healing revivals in the 1950s.
Okay.
This is where prosperity teachings start showing up alongside faith healing in a big way.
Oh, yeah. The tent revivals. I've seen pictures. They were huge.
Absolutely. People everywhere.
Mm.
And one of the biggest names during that era was Oral Roberts.
Okay.
He popularized this idea of seed faith.
Seed faith. Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Okay, so imagine planting a seed, right?
Yeah.
You give up a little something now, but with the right care and conditions, it multiplies, right? It grows into something much bigger.
Right.
That was Robert's whole thing. Donations to his ministry, they weren't just charitable giving, they were seeds.
Okay.
God would take those seeds and return them to the giver multifold.
So you give a little, you get back a lot
Right.
too, and that's all thanks to, you guessed it, God's blessing.
Right.
It sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it?
It does have that kind of ring to it, right?
Yeah.
But Roberts was so confident in it, he actually offered to return donations if they didn't lead to an equivalent unexpected financial gain.
Wow, talk about putting your money where your mouth is.
Right.
Although I guess in this case it was more like putting other people's money where his faith was. But did it work? I mean, did people get rich?
Whether or not people donations led to financial windfalls, it's hard to say.
Right.
But what we do know is that Robert's message, it resonated, this whole seed faith idea. It was a game changer because it reframed giving, not as an act of charity or sacrifice, but as a savvy investment strategy.
It plays on that very human desire for a sure thing, a guaranteed return. And who doesn't want to believe that their financial success is a sign of God's favor? But Roberts wasn't the only one making waves during this time, right?
Oh, absolutely not. This is where those larger-than-life personalities start to emerge.
Huh?
Remember we talked about Pentecostalism emphasizing spiritual experience?
Yes.
Well, that played right into the rise of these charismatic preachers, like A.A. Allen.
Okay, A.A. Allen. Ring a bell, but I might need a refresher.
Okay, so he was known for his healing ministries and his flair for the dramatic.
Okay.
We're talking miracle tent shavings, miracle oil.
Miracle tent shavings.
Yeah.
Miracle oil. Okay, now this is where I need you to elaborate because that sounds like something out of, I don't know, like a carnival sideshow.
Well, that's how a lot of critics saw it too.
Okay.
But for Allen's followers, these objects held tangible power. They were physical representations of their faith, imbued with the potential to unlock God's blessings.
So we've got seed faith, miracle oil. It's all starting to feel a bit, I don't know, gimmicky, right? But clearly something about this message resonated with people.
You're right. You're right. And we'd be remiss not to touch on the social and economic context of the time. The post-war era,
Yeah.
saw this huge rise in consumerism, a
Right.
focus on material prosperity. It's no coincidence that prosperity theology gained traction during this period.
So it tapped into something that was already bubbling beneath the surface, this desire for a better life, for the American dream.
Yeah.
But what happens next? Does it just keep growing?
The 60s and 70s saw prosperity theology become even more deeply intertwined with this image of material success.
Yeah.
Figures like T.L. Osborne, another prominent preacher, would use their own wealth,
Hmm.
often quite ostentatiously,
Right.
as proof of God's favor.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? God has blessed me with wealth, and the proof is my wealth, which means God must favor me.
Exactly. And this is also when televangelism explodes onto the scene.
Right.
Suddenly, figures like Oral Roberts and the very flamboyant Reverend Ike
Oh, yeah.
become household names, beaming the prosperity gospel into living rooms across the country.
Oh, yeah. Reverend Ike. Wasn't he the one known for his, like, extravagant clothes and cars?
That's the one.
Yeah.
He fully embraced this lavish lifestyle, which,
Okay.
again,
Right.
made some uncomfortable, but it also drew people in.
Yeah.
He was like this walking, talking embodiment of the prosperity gospel,
Right.
preaching that God wanted his followers to be just as blessed as he was.
Blessed with matching fur coats, I'm assuming.
Yeah, something like that.
It's fascinating how this all ties together, how historical context and these charismatic figures all played a part in the evolution of prosperity theology. But what about the teachings themselves? How did they develop during this period?
The 1970s and 80s saw the rise of the Word of Faith movement,
Okay.
which took those positive confession teachings we talked about earlier and cranked them up to 11.
Word of faith. Okay, so it's like prosperity theology is evolving, getting more specific and intense in its claims about like how much control we have over our destiny.
You got it.
Okay.
The Word of Faith movement doubled down on the idea that God wants you to be rich, and it's your God-given right to claim that wealth.
And who are the big players in this movement?
One of the most influential was Kenneth Copeland,
Okay.
who a lot of people still might recognize from his TV ministry.
Mm-hmm.
He taught that prosperity wasn't just a possibility, it was a law.
Okay.
If you're living in poverty, it was because you hadn't, cracked the code yet.
Oh, yeah.
You hadn't applied the right formula of faith and giving.
Wow, no pressure or anything, right?
Yeah.
Just unlock the secret formula and boom, instant millionaire, all thanks to the Almighty.
Basically, it was and still is a powerful message, especially for those who are struggling financially.
Mm.
And then you had Creflo Dollar,
Okay.
another major voice in the movement, who had a slightly different take. He framed prosperity as this divine contract.
A contract. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that. A divine contract, huh? So God's already promised the wealth, and we just gotta like hold up our end of the bargain through faith and, those generous donations.
That was and still is Dollar's central teaching.
Right.
He argues that God's desire for us to prosper is already written in the contract. We just need to activate it.
It's a pretty appealing idea.
Right.
This almost legal guarantee of blessings.
Yeah.
But didn't this period also see some, let's say, complications with these like big name prosperity preachers?
It did.
Huh.
The 80s and 90s saw a number of scandals involving televangelists.
Right.
Often centered around financial impropriety.
Right.
The most famous case being Jim Bakker in the PTL ministry.
Ah, yes, the infamous Jim Bakker.
Right.
Didn't his empire crumble amidst accusations of fraud and other, let's say, less than holy activities?
It did.
Okay.
And while Baker's downfall tarnished the image of televangelism for a while,
Right.
it didn't stop the prosperity gospel's momentum.
No.
By the late 2000s, it was estimated that tens of millions of Christians worldwide had embraced these teachings.
Tens of millions. Wow. So even with the scandals and the criticisms, this is an idea that has resonated across cultures and continents.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? What makes it so appealing in different parts of the world?
There's a few theories about that.
Okay.
In many parts of the world, particularly in the global south,
Mm-hmm.
prosperity theology offers a message of hope and empowerment in places where people might feel economically powerless.
It's like a spiritual antidote to economic hardship.
Exactly. Prosperity theology often emphasizes taking control of your destiny, speaking things into existence, believing that God wants you to prosper.
Right.
It's a really powerful message in contexts where poverty and lack of opportunity are widespread.
Yeah.
And for many, it aligns with existing cultural beliefs about the supernatural and the power of faith to bring about material blessings.
So it's not just about the money, it's about tapping into a deeper sense of agency,
Yeah.
of hope. But I have to ask, the elephant in the room here. If financial success is a sign of God's favor,
Yeah.
what does that say about those who are struggling? Does it imply that they're somehow less deserving or less faithful?
That's one of the biggest criticisms leveled against prosperity theology.
Yeah.
Critics argue that it creates a system where material wealth becomes the measure of God's blessing,
Right.
which can be incredibly damaging.
Because it ignores systemic issues,
Yeah.
societal inequalities,
Yeah.
all the complex factors that contribute to someone's financial situation.
Exactly. And it puts the onus solely on the individual,
Right.
which can lead to feelings of guilt, shame, and ultimately spiritual alienation.
Which feels like the opposite of what faith should be about.
Yeah.
But it's not like everyone who subscribes to prosperity theology is out there, driving gold-plated cars, right? There are different interpretations, different ways of practicing these beliefs.
Absolutely. It's not a monolithic belief system.
Right.
There's a spectrum, even within prosperity theology.
Right.
Some proponents take a more moderate approach,
Oh, okay.
emphasizing responsible stewardship of resources
Okay.
and the importance of using wealth to help others.
So less bling-bling and more giving back.
Precisely. They might still believe that God wants them to be prosperous, but they see it as a responsibility to use that wealth to make a positive impact,
Right.
to support their communities and help those in need.
Okay, so even within this movement that's often criticized for being overly focused on material wealth, there's a recognition of the importance of compassion.
Yeah.
Of using your blessings to bless others.
Absolutely.
Okay.
However, even with those more moderate expressions, prosperity theology still faces criticism.
Right.
Some argue that it can lead to a transactional view of faith where people feel pressured to give beyond their means in hopes of receiving a financial windfall.
It's like that age-old question. Are we worshiping God or are we worshiping the potential blessings?
Right.
It's a lot to unpack, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
It really is. And like with any belief system, it's important for individuals to engage critically,
Right.
to examine these teachings in light of their own values and their own understanding of faith.
Beautifully said. I think this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, the historical roots, the key figures, the criticisms, the appeals.
We did.
But ultimately, it's up to each individual to wrestle with these ideas and decide what resonates with them.
I completely agree. And if there's one thing I hope our listener takes away from this deep dive, it's the importance of approaching these teachings with a critical eye,
Right.
with a sense of discernment.
Because whether you find yourself drawn to the message of prosperity or put off by its potential pitfalls, there's no denying that this is a belief system that continues to shape lives and spark debate. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. If we separate material wealth from the equation, what does a truly blessed life look like to you?
That's a question worth considering.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep asking those big questions and keep diving deep.